For thousands of years, humanity has searched for answers. We have looked to the stars, built civilizations, created religions, and pursued knowledge with relentless determination. Yet despite all our progress, the deepest questions remain unanswered. Who are we? Why are we here? What is the true nature of reality? The ancient tradition known as Hermeticism offers a radical answer. The universe and the human soul are reflections of one another. According to the teachings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary sage revered as the master of divine wisdom, the cosmos is not a collection of separate objects drifting through empty space. It is a living, interconnected whole, a vast intelligent reality woven together by hidden laws and eternal principles. The ancients believed that every star, every thought, every event, and every human life participates in this grand design. Nothing stands alone. Everything is connected. This idea is captured in one of the most famous teachings ever preserved, as above, so below, as below, so above. To the modern mind, these words may seem mysterious, yet they point toward a profound truth. The same patterns that govern the universe also operate within the human soul. The outer world mirrors the inner world. To understand one is to understand the other. This is why Hermeticism places such extraordinary importance on self-knowledge. For the Hermetic sages, self-discovery was not merely a path to personal growth. It was the key to unlocking the mysteries of existence itself. To know yourself was to know the universe. To understand your own consciousness was to glimpse the mind of creation. This book invites you to explore that ancient vision. You will journey into teachings that have inspired philosophers, mystics, alchemists, and seekers for centuries. You will encounter timeless principles that challenge conventional assumptions about reality, consciousness, and human potential. Whether you approach these teachings as philosophy, spirituality, symbolism, or a map of inner transformation, the invitation remains the same. Know yourself, and in doing so discover a universe far greater and far closer than you ever imagined. Chapter 1. The Corpus Hermeticum. There are books that inform, books that entertain, and books that inspire. Then there are books that seem to look back at the reader. The Corpus Hermeticum belongs to that final category. For centuries, seekers whispered about these mysterious writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary sage who stood at the crossroads of Egyptian and Greek wisdom. Hidden within these texts was not merely a philosophy, but a radical proposition. Humanity has forgotten its true nature, and awakening begins through remembrance. The Corpus Hermeticum is not written as a textbook. It unfolds as a conversation, a sacred dialogue between a student and a cosmic teacher. In its most famous section, known as Poimandres, the seeker encounters a vast intelligence that reveals the structure of reality itself. The teacher does not offer commandments or rituals. Instead, he offers vision. He reveals that what people call reality is only partially understood because most people look outward while remaining strangers to their own consciousness. Ancient initiates understood something modern society often overlooks. Information alone does not transform a human being. A person may read thousands of books and remain unchanged. Yet a single realization can alter the direction of an entire life. The Hermetic texts were designed to provoke such realizations. They were not intended merely to be understood intellectually. They were intended to awaken perception. Imagine an old traveler crossing a desert. For years he follows familiar paths, believing he knows the landscape completely. One evening, an elder points toward a mountain he has somehow never noticed. Suddenly the traveler realizes the mountain had always been there. His eyes simply never recognized it. The mountain did not appear at that moment. His awareness expanded. The corpus hermeticum works in much the same way. It suggests that deeper dimensions of reality are already present, waiting to be noticed. One ancient story tells of a young initiate entering a temple seeking secret wisdom. Expecting hidden scrolls and mystical formulas, he was surprised when the master handed him a polished bronze mirror. The initiate waited for instructions. None came. After hours of confusion, he demanded an explanation. The master replied, "Until you understand the one looking into the mirror, no other secret can help you." This is the central spirit of Hermetic wisdom. Self-knowledge comes before mastery. Understanding consciousness comes before understanding reality. The Hermetic sages observed that most people spend their lives studying effects while ignoring causes. They become fascinated by events, circumstances, and appearances. Yet beneath every visible effect exists an invisible principle. Beneath every action lies a thought. Beneath every thought lies a belief. Beneath every belief lies a perception of self. The Corpus Hermeticum invites the seeker to journey inward toward these hidden foundations. What makes these teachings so enduring is their psychological depth. Even today, people often live on autopilot. Habits dictate behavior. Reactions repeat themselves endlessly. Old fears shape new decisions. A person may believe they are choosing freely while unknowingly following patterns formed decades earlier. Hermetic wisdom encourages a different path. It asks the individual to become conscious of the forces operating within. The texts repeatedly emphasize awakening. Yet awakening is not presented as an extraordinary supernatural event. Rather, it is described as a shift in perception. A person begins to see more clearly. They recognize how thoughts influence actions, how assumptions color experience, and how unconscious habits quietly shape destiny. A farmer once planted 2 fields. One received daily attention, the other was neglected. Months later, one field flourished while the other produced weeds. When asked why this happened, the farmer simply smiled and said, "Both fields grew exactly what they were given." The Hermetic teachers would have appreciated this story. Human consciousness works in much the same way. What receives attention grows. What remains unconscious develops without guidance. This is why the Corpus Hermeticum places such importance on understanding principles rather than memorizing stories. Stories inspire, principles transform. A story may be forgotten. A principle can guide an entire lifetime. The modern reader sometimes searches ancient texts hoping to discover hidden techniques for wealth, power, or influence. Yet the deeper message of Hermeticism points elsewhere. The true treasure is clarity. The true initiation is awareness. The true secret is learning to perceive reality through awakened understanding. The action for this chapter is simple but profound. Study principles, not merely stories. Whenever you encounter wisdom, ask yourself what universal truth lies beneath the narrative. Look for patterns rather than details. Search for causes rather than effects. The Hermetic sages believed that reality reveals itself to those willing to observe deeply, not because reality changes, but because perception evolves. Wisdom transforms perception. Chapter 2. The first Hermetic principle, mentalism. Imagine waking tomorrow in exactly the same house, with the same possessions, the same responsibilities, and the same circumstances. Nothing external has changed. Yet somehow your experience of life feels entirely different. How could that be possible? The Hermetic masters answered this question with one of their most famous teachings, the all is mind. This principle, later popularized in Hermetic traditions, is known as mentalism. It does not suggest that physical reality is imaginary. Rather, it proposes something more subtle and profound. Everything human beings experience is filtered through consciousness. Reality is encountered through the mind. Consider two travelers walking through the same storm. One sees disaster, inconvenience, and frustration. The other sees nourishment for crops, relief for the land, and beauty in the clouds. The storm is identical. The experience is not. This observation lies at the heart of Hermetic thought. Ancient initiates noticed that people rarely react to reality itself. Instead, they react to their interpretation of reality. Two individuals can face the same challenge and emerge with entirely different outcomes because they perceive the event differently. One becomes stronger, the other becomes defeated. The external circumstance may be identical, yet consciousness creates a different world within each person. There is an old Hermetic parable about a king who possessed a magical ring. Whenever great fortune arrived, the ring whispered, "This will pass." Whenever hardship appeared, it whispered the same words, "This will pass." Over time, the king learned a remarkable lesson. His suffering often came not from events themselves, but from the meanings he attached to them. The ring did not change reality, it changed perception, and perception changed experience. Many people misunderstand mentalism. They assume it means merely thinking positively. The Hermetic masters taught something far deeper. They understood that reality contains objective conditions, challenges, and limitations. Yet they also recognize that the quality of one's inner life determines how those conditions are interpreted and navigated. Mentalism is not denial, it is awareness. A sailor cannot control the ocean. He cannot command the wind. He cannot eliminate storms. Yet he can adjust his sails. He can choose his response. He can learn to navigate conditions rather than be destroyed by them. The mind functions in a similar way. Modern psychology continues to confirm insights that ancient Hermeticists observed centuries ago. Repeated thoughts become beliefs. Beliefs influence emotions. Emotions shape behavior. Behavior creates results. Over time, results reinforce beliefs. A cycle emerges. The Hermetic sages saw this process clearly. They understood that if someone wishes to transform their experience of life, they must begin where experience begins, within consciousness itself. A merchant once visited a wise teacher and complained that the world was filled with dishonest people. The teacher handed him a basket and asked him to spend the day collecting rotten fruit from the marketplace. The merchant returned that evening with a basket full of spoiled fruit. The next day, the teacher instructed him to collect only the freshest fruit. He returned with a basket overflowing with abundance. "What changed?" asked the teacher. "The market stayed the same," replied the merchant. "Only my attention changed." The teacher nodded. This simple story reveals a profound truth. Attention acts like a spotlight. It determines which aspects of reality become most vivid. What we repeatedly focus upon gains power within our experience. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means recognizing that awareness directs energy. The mind continuously selects, interprets, and organizes experience. In this sense, consciousness participates in reality rather than merely observing it. The Hermetic path, therefore, begins with observation. Not judgment, not suppression, observation. Notice recurring thoughts. Notice emotional patterns. Notice the stories you tell yourself about life, other people, and your own potential. These patterns quietly shape the architecture of experience. The ancient initiates believed that mastery begins the moment a person realizes they are not helpless before their own mind. They can observe it, they can guide it, they can refine it, they can transform it. This is not accomplished in a single day. It is a lifelong discipline, yet every journey begins with awareness. The practical action for this chapter is simple. Spend the next few days observing your recurring thoughts. Which beliefs appear repeatedly? Which assumptions dominate your perception? Which mental habits strengthen you? And which quietly limit you? Do not rush to change them. First, learn to see them, because what remains unseen remains powerful, and what becomes conscious can be transformed. The first Hermetic principle teaches that consciousness is not a passive spectator. It is an active participant in experience. The quality of the inner world influences the quality of the world that is perceived. The sages summarized this truth in a single unforgettable idea: mind shapes worlds, chapter 3. The Emerald Tablet and as above, so below. Among all the surviving fragments of Hermetic wisdom, no text has inspired more fascination than the mysterious Emerald Tablet. Unlike lengthy philosophical treatises, the tablet is remarkably brief. Its entire teaching can be read in minutes. Yet for centuries, alchemists, mystics, philosophers, and seekers devoted lifetimes to understanding its meaning. Legend claims the tablet was discovered hidden within a sacred chamber, engraved upon a green stone and carrying the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus himself. Whether the story is literal history or symbolic myth matters less than the enduring influence of the message it carried. At the heart of the tablet stands one of the most famous lines in all esoteric literature: as above, so below; as below, so above. At first glance, the phrase appears simple, yet the ancients regarded it as a key capable of unlocking countless mysteries. The principle suggests that reality is woven together through correspondence. Patterns repeat themselves across different levels of existence. The same laws operating in the heavens can be observed within nature. The same forces shaping civilizations can be found within individuals. The same principles governing the outer world can often be discovered in the inner world. The Hermetic sages viewed humanity as a microcosm, a small reflection of a greater cosmic order. The universe was the macrocosm, the vast expression of the same principles on a grander scale. To ancient initiates, this was not merely philosophy. It was a method of observation. Imagine standing beside a river. You notice that every branch floating upon the water follows the current. Then you observe clouds moving through the sky. Later you watch the seasons change. Eventually you begin to recognize something remarkable. Different forms, different scales, yet similar patterns, movement, cycles, flow, transformation. The wise began to ask a profound question. If patterns repeat throughout nature, might they also repeat within the human soul? A story from an old Hermetic school tells of a student who approached his teacher asking to learn the secrets of the stars. The master led him not to an observatory, but to a quiet pond. For hours they sat in silence. Finally, frustrated, the student asked, "When will we study the heavens?" The master pointed toward the still water. "Look!" The student gazed into the pond and saw the sky reflected perfectly upon its surface. The teacher smiled. The heavens are easier to understand when you first understand reflection. This story captures the essence of correspondence. The ancients believed that understanding one level of reality could illuminate another. A garden could teach lessons about the mind. The movement of tides could reveal truths about emotions. The rise and fall of kingdoms could reflect the rise and fall of thoughts within a single individual. This is why ancient wisdom traditions often spoke in symbols rather than direct explanations. They invited the seeker to recognize patterns rather than memorize information. Modern life provides countless examples of correspondence. A disorganized room often reflects a disorganized state of mind. A person filled with chronic resentment frequently perceives hostility everywhere. Someone who cultivates gratitude often notices opportunities others overlook. These examples do not mean external circumstances are created solely by thoughts. Hermetic wisdom is subtler than that. Rather, it suggests that inner conditions influence perception, behavior, and response, and those responses help shape outcomes. The farmer who carefully tends his soil eventually influences the harvest. The gardener who neglects the roots cannot expect healthy flowers. The outer result reflects the inner preparation. One ancient alchemist explained it beautifully. Do not seek to control the branches while ignoring the roots. Most people spend their lives trying to rearrange branches. They seek better circumstances without examining beliefs. They desire peace without cultivating inner stillness. They chase fulfillment while neglecting self-understanding. The Emerald Tablet reverses this process. It teaches that transformation often begins within. This principle becomes especially powerful when applied to self-observation. When recurring challenges appear repeatedly in life, the Hermetic student asks an unusual question. What inner pattern might correspond to this outer experience? Notice that this question is not self-blame. It is self-inquiry. A man who repeatedly enters unhealthy relationships may eventually discover a hidden belief about his own worth. A leader who constantly encounters conflict may uncover an unconscious need to control. A person trapped in cycles of procrastination may realize that fear, not laziness, has been guiding behavior. The outer event becomes a mirror. The reflection reveals the source. This is why Hermetic teachings place such importance on awareness. Without awareness, patterns remain invisible. Without awareness, lessons repeat. The practical application of the Emerald Tablet is surprisingly simple. Study patterns, observe recurring situations, notice emotional cycles, pay attention to repeated themes in relationships, work, ambitions, and fears. Life often speaks through repetition. The ancients believed that what appears random frequently carries hidden order waiting to be recognized. Every season teaches something. Every cycle reveals something. Every reflection points somewhere. The Emerald Tablet invites us to become students of correspondence, to see connections where others see accidents, to recognize meaning where others see coincidence, to understand that the outer world may reveal truths about the inner world, because the deepest Hermetic secret is not hidden in distant stars. It is hidden within the relationship between observer and observed. Chapter 4. The Principle of Correspondence in Daily Life. Most people have experienced a strange phenomenon without fully noticing it. A certain type of problem appears repeatedly. The faces change, but the conflict remains familiar. The workplace changes, yet the frustration feels identical. Relationships begin differently, but somehow arrive at the same emotional destination. The details vary, but the pattern persists. The Hermetic masters paid close attention to such repetitions. They believed recurring experiences often reveal recurring inner structures. In other words, what appears outside may be echoing something inside. A wise old storyteller once described life as a hall of mirrors. He said that people spend years arguing with reflections while never turning around to examine themselves. At first, his listeners laughed. Years later, many realized he was describing human nature perfectly. We often search for explanations everywhere except within. When disappointment occurs, we blame circumstances. When conflict appears, we blame other people. When obstacles emerge, we blame fate. Sometimes these explanations are valid, yet Hermetic wisdom asks an additional question: what part of this experience is teaching me something about myself? This question changes everything. Ancient initiates were trained to observe emotional patterns with extraordinary honesty. They understood that recurring emotions often act like invisible architects. Fear builds one kind of life. Confidence builds another. Resentment creates one perception of reality. Gratitude creates another. A person may believe they are responding to life objectively while actually interpreting events through emotional habits formed long ago. Consider two travelers entering the same city. One expects danger, the other expects opportunity. Their experiences will not be identical. The fearful traveler notices threats. The optimistic traveler notices possibilities. The city remains unchanged. Perception alters reality's meaning. This insight appears repeatedly throughout Hermetic teachings. Reality is not experienced directly. It is filtered through consciousness. A famous parable tells of a king who owned a palace lined entirely with mirrors. One evening, a frightened dog wandered inside. Seeing hundreds of dogs surrounding him, he began barking aggressively. The reflections barked back. Terrified, he growled louder. The reflections did the same. By morning, the exhausted dog had collapsed, convinced he had spent the night fighting enemies. Days later, another dog entered the palace. This one wagged its tail happily. Immediately, hundreds of friendly dogs appeared to greet him. He left believing the palace was the most welcoming place in the world. Nothing changed except the dog. The palace reflected what it received. The Hermetic teachers loved stories like this because they revealed a timeless truth. Human beings often encounter reflections without recognizing them as reflections. Emotional habits become lenses, beliefs become filters, assumptions become invisible walls. Over time, these patterns create recurring experiences that seem mysterious until they are examined. The principle of correspondence, therefore, requires courage. It is easier to analyze the world than to analyze oneself. It is easier to criticize circumstances than question assumptions. It is easier to blame fate than investigate patterns. Yet transformation begins precisely at that point of honest observation. Marcus Aurelius, though not a Hermetic teacher, expressed a similar insight when he wrote that the soul becomes colored by its thoughts. The Hermetic sages would have agreed. What occupies the inner world gradually influences the outer experience, not through magic, through perception, behavior, attention, and choice. The individual who constantly expects betrayal behaves differently than one who expects trust. The person consumed by scarcity notices limitations more than opportunities. The person who cultivates patience sees possibilities hidden by impulsiveness. Inner conditions quietly shape external outcomes. This is why self-examination was considered a sacred practice. Not because it produces guilt, because it produces freedom. When a pattern becomes visible, it can be transformed. When a lesson becomes conscious, it no longer needs endless repetition. When a belief is recognized, it loses its invisible power. The practical action for this chapter is simple but profound. Examine recurring life lessons. Ask yourself, what challenge appears repeatedly? What emotion surfaces most often? What situation seems determined to return? Instead of asking, why does this keep happening to me? Try asking, what is this experience attempting to teach me? The difference between those two questions is the difference between frustration and wisdom. The Hermetic path teaches that life is not merely a sequence of events. It is also a sequence of reflections. Some reflections are pleasant, some are uncomfortable, all are valuable, because patterns are rarely punishments, they are messages, and those who learn to read them discover that life itself becomes a teacher. The mirror stops being an enemy, it becomes a guide. Chapter 5. Asclepius and Humanity's Divine Potential. One of the most fascinating texts within the Hermetic tradition is Asclepius, a work presented as a dialogue between Hermes Trismegistus and his devoted student. Unlike many ancient writings that focus on gods, rituals, or cosmology, Asclepius turns its attention toward a startling subject: the hidden greatness of humanity itself. The dialogue begins with a question that has echoed across centuries: what is a human being? Most people believe they already know the answer. A human is a body, a personality, a collection of memories, responsibilities, successes, and failures. Yet Hermes challenges this assumption. He suggests that humanity is far more mysterious than it appears. According to the ancient teaching, people are not merely creatures surviving on a small planet. They are participants in a vast unfolding drama of consciousness. They possess the unique ability to recognize themselves, examine themselves, and deliberately transform themselves. This capacity for self-awareness was considered one of the greatest mysteries of existence. The Hermetic masters saw humanity as standing between two worlds. One foot rests in the visible realm of matter. The other reaches toward the invisible realm of mind, meaning, and spirit. Human beings are both earthly and transcendent, both temporary and timeless. This idea appears repeatedly throughout ancient wisdom traditions. Beneath different languages and symbols lies the same suggestion. Humanity has forgotten something essential about itself. There is an old Hermetic story about a prince who was separated from his kingdom shortly after birth. Raised among villagers, he spent decades believing he was ordinary. He worked simple jobs, struggled through hardships, and accepted limitations imposed by circumstance. One day, an elderly traveler arrived carrying an ancient seal bearing the prince's family crest. The traveler revealed the truth of his origin. At first the prince laughed. Then he doubted, then he resisted. Finally he accepted. The revelation did not instantly make him wise or powerful. Yet it changed the way he saw himself. From that moment forward, every choice carried a different meaning. The kingdom had always belonged to him. Only his memory had been lost. The Hermetic sages used stories like this because they believed most people live in a similar condition. They possess extraordinary potential, yet identify primarily with limitations. They define themselves through circumstances, labels, failures, and fears. The deepest prison is forgetfulness. Modern life offers countless examples of this phenomenon. A child begins life curious, imaginative, and open to possibility. Over time, repeated criticism, disappointment, and conditioning create boundaries. The individual gradually learns what they supposedly cannot do, cannot become, or cannot achieve. The world often teaches caution before confidence, conformity before creativity, fear before exploration. Eventually, many people stop growing, not because growth is impossible, but because they have accepted a smaller vision of themselves. The teachings of Asclepius challenge this contraction. They propose that human beings are unfinished creations, not in a negative sense, but in a dynamic sense. Growth is built into existence itself. Evolution is not merely biological. It is psychological, moral, intellectual, and spiritual. A seed contains a tree, yet the tree does not appear instantly. Within the seed lies possibility waiting for expression. Human potential operates similarly. The Hermetic masters observed that every person carries unrealized capacities. wisdom that has not yet awakened, courage that has not yet been tested, compassion that has not yet been fully expressed, creativity that remains dormant, potential seeks expression. This is one reason ancient initiatory traditions emphasized self-development. Their purpose was not to escape life, but to participate in it more consciously. They viewed each challenge as an opportunity for refinement. A blacksmith heats metal not to destroy it, but to strengthen it. The sculptor removes stone not to diminish it, but to reveal form. Likewise, life's difficulties often expose capacities that comfort would never reveal. Many people discover resilience only after hardship. They discover courage only after fear. They discover wisdom only after confusion. The Hermetic perspective invites us to see these experiences differently. Instead of viewing obstacles solely as interruptions, they become instruments of development. The soul evolves through engagement with life. This does not mean every hardship is desirable. It means every experience contains potential value when approached consciously. One of the most powerful insights from Asclepius is that greatness is not measured by status or achievement alone. Ancient wisdom cared less about what a person possessed and more about what they became. A wealthy person ruled by fear was considered less developed than a humble person ruled by wisdom. External success could impress society. Own mastery transformed the soul. The practical lesson remains remarkably relevant. Live intentionally. Do not drift through life as if growth happens automatically. Examine your choices, cultivate your character, develop your understanding. Nurture your highest capacities. The prince in the ancient story did not become royal the day he learned his identity. He became royal the day he started living in accordance with it. Potential alone is not enough. It must be expressed, it must be embodied, it must be lived. The Hermetic sages believed that every human being carries possibilities far greater than they realize. The purpose of wisdom is not to add something new, but to awaken what already exists. The forgotten treasure is not somewhere outside you, it is waiting within. Chapter 6. The Principle of Rhythm. Long before clocks measured time and calendars organized human schedules, ancient observers noticed something profound about reality. Everything moved in cycles. The sun rose and set, the moon waxed and waned, the tides advanced and retreated, the seasons changed, birth followed death, growth followed decay, nothing remained fixed. The Hermetic masters recognized this universal movement and described it as the principle of rhythm. According to this teaching, life unfolds through recurring patterns of expansion and contraction, activity and rest, ascent and descent. Rhythm is not an exception within nature. It is one of nature's fundamental laws. Ancient civilizations paid close attention to these cycles. Because survival depended upon understanding them, farmers knew there was a season for planting and a season for harvesting. Sailors understood that tides could not be forced. Astronomers tracked celestial movements to anticipate future changes. The wise learned to cooperate with rhythm rather than fight against it. One old story tells of a young farmer who became impatient after planting his crops. Every morning he rushed into the field expecting immediate growth. Days passed. Nothing appeared. Frustrated, he began pulling gently on the shoots to help them grow faster. Within weeks he had destroyed much of the harvest. An elder from the village shook his head and said, "You cannot command the rhythm of nature. You can only work with it." This simple story contains profound wisdom. Modern life often encourages the illusion that everything should happen immediately. Results should arrive instantly. Progress should be constant. Success should be uninterrupted. Reality rarely functions that way. The principle of rhythm reminds us that every process contains phases. Growth includes periods of apparent stagnation. Learning includes periods of confusion. Transformation includes periods of uncertainty. Many people abandon worthwhile goals because they misinterpret natural cycles as failure. A writer experiences creative drought and assumes inspiration is gone forever. An entrepreneur faces temporary setbacks and believes the vision is flawed. A seeker enters a period of inner silence and assumes spiritual growth has stopped. The Hermetic sages would advise patience. The winter season is not proof that spring has vanished. Cycles continue even when progress is invisible. History itself reflects this principle. Civilizations rise, civilizations decline. Ideas emerge, flourish, disappear, and return centuries later. The wisdom of ancient Egypt influenced Greece. Greek thought influenced Rome. Forgotten teachings resurfaced during the Renaissance. Human history moves like a tide, advancing, retreating, returning. The same pattern appears within individual lives. There are seasons of ambition, seasons of reflection, seasons of achievement, seasons of recovery. Trouble arises when people attempt to remain permanently in one phase. The river flows because it moves. A stagnant pool eventually becomes unhealthy. Life requires motion. The principle of rhythm also offers valuable psychological insight. Emotions move in cycles. Confidence rises and falls. Motivation fluctuates. Energy changes. Ancient initiates were trained not to identify too strongly with temporary states. A difficult emotional season did not define the person. It represented a phase. Likewise, periods of success were appreciated but not clung to. Everything moves, everything changes. This understanding creates resilience. A sailor who understands tides does not panic when the water recedes. He knows it will return. Likewise, a wise person learns not to despair during temporary difficulties. They recognize that movement itself is part of the process. The Hermetic masters taught another important lesson. While rhythm cannot be eliminated, it can be navigated consciously. Awareness allows greater balance. A person who recognizes emotional cycles can respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. A leader who understands historical cycles can prepare for change rather than be surprised by it. A seeker who understands spiritual rhythms can remain steady through both clarity and confusion. The goal is not to stop the pendulum. The goal is to maintain balance while it swings. Imagine standing at the center of a spinning wheel. The outer edge moves rapidly. The center remains stable. Ancient wisdom encouraged people to live from that center, to observe change without being consumed by it, to participate in life without becoming lost within its fluctuations. The practical application is simple. Stop resisting cycles, notice them, learn from them, work with them. If you are in a season of growth, embrace it. If you are in a season of rest, honor it. If you are in a season of challenge, learn from it. Every phase carries a lesson. Every cycle contains value. Every rhythm contributes to development. The Hermetic sages understood something many people forget. Life is not a straight line. It is a living pattern, a dance of expansion and contraction, a movement between opposites, a rhythm guiding growth. And those who learn to move with it discover a deeper kind of peace, not because change disappears, but because they no longer fear it. Chapter 7. The principle of vibration. Imagine holding a stone in your hand. It appears completely still, solid, motionless, unchanging. Yet modern science reveals that beneath the surface, countless particles are moving continuously. What appears stable is alive with activity. What appears silent is filled with motion. Long before microscopes and particle physics, the Hermetic sages arrived at a similar insight through observation and contemplation. They taught that nothing in existence remains truly still. Everything moves, everything changes, everything vibrates. This became known as the principle of vibration, one of the most intriguing teachings associated with Hermetic philosophy. To the ancient mind, vibration was not merely physical movement. It described the dynamic nature of reality itself. Thoughts shift, emotions rise and fall, ideas spread, civilizations evolve. Rivers flow, stars travel across the heavens. Existence is not a collection of fixed objects, but an endless process of movement and transformation. The Hermetic masters often warned against one of humanity's greatest illusions, the illusion of permanence. People become attached to present conditions because they assume they will remain unchanged. They believe their current fears will last forever. They imagine today's success will never fade. They expect certainty from a world built upon movement, yet life constantly demonstrates otherwise. Joy becomes sorrow, sorrow becomes wisdom, failure becomes growth, confusion becomes clarity, everything moves. There is an old Hermetic story about a traveler who arrived in a city during a terrible drought. The streets were dry, the fields were barren, the people were anxious. The traveler met an elderly woman drawing water from a nearly empty well. "Will this suffering ever end?" he asked. The woman smiled. "Have you ever seen a season remain forever?" Months later, the rains arrived. Years later, another drought followed. The old woman had understood something, the traveler had not. Conditions change because change itself is woven into reality. The principle of vibration teaches us to see beyond appearances and recognize movement even when it is subtle. Consider the inner world. Most people think emotions simply happen to them. They feel angry, anxious, inspired or discouraged, and assume these states define reality. Yet Hermetic wisdom suggests something different. Emotions are movements. They are currents flowing through consciousness. They are states, not identities. This distinction changes everything. A person experiencing sadness may unconsciously believe, "This is who I am." The Hermetic teacher would gently correct them. "No, this is where you are." States change, identity remains deeper. This understanding offers extraordinary freedom. If emotions are movements rather than fixed realities, then transformation becomes possible. The ancients observed that a person's inner condition influences perception. Two people can walk through the same environment and experience entirely different worlds. One notices opportunity, the other notices threat. One sees beauty, the other sees problems. The external environment remains unchanged, yet experience differs dramatically. Why? Because consciousness acts as a lens. The quality of perception often reflects the state of the observer. A famous Hermetic parable tells of a musician who carried an ancient instrument from village to village. Before performing, he would tune the strings carefully. One day, a young student asked why this ritual was so important. The musician replied, "If the instrument is out of tune, the music suffers." The listener blames the song, but the problem begins with the strings. The Hermetic masters believed the same principle applies to the human mind. Many people attempt to change circumstances while ignoring their inner condition. They try to create peace while carrying turmoil. They seek clarity while nurturing confusion. They pursue wisdom while feeding distraction. The instrument remains untuned. The resulting music reflects the condition of the player. This does not mean positive thinking magically eliminates every difficulty. Ancient Hermetic teachings are far more practical than simplistic optimism. Instead, they emphasize awareness. Notice your emotional frequency. Notice recurring mental states. Notice the atmosphere you carry throughout the day, because these subtle patterns influence behavior. Behavior influences decisions. Decisions influence outcomes. Transformation often begins with a shift that nobody else can see. A fearful person learns courage. A resentful person learns forgiveness. A distracted person learns attention. An impulsive person learns patience. The external life eventually reflects the internal movement. The vibration changes. The experience changes. This is why many ancient schools devoted enormous effort to disciplines of self-observation. They understood that mastery begins with awareness. You cannot transform what you refuse to notice. You cannot elevate what remains unconscious. You cannot direct what you do not observe. The practical application of this principle is surprisingly simple. Throughout the day, pause occasionally and ask, what emotional atmosphere am I carrying right now? Not to judge yourself, not to suppress emotions, simply to notice. Awareness creates space. Space creates choice. Choice creates transformation. Over time, this practice reveals patterns previously hidden from view. You begin to recognize which states nourish growth and which states drain vitality. You become less controlled by temporary moods and more guided by conscious intention. The Hermetic sages believed this awareness represented genuine power, not power over others, power over oneself. Because the individual who understands inner movement is no longer a prisoner of every passing emotion. They become a participant rather than a victim, an observer rather than a captive, a creator rather than a reactor, and in that realization lies one of Hermeticism's deepest insights. Nothing remains still, not your circumstances, not your thoughts, not your fears, not your possibilities. Everything moves. Chapter 8. The Law of Gender. Among the Hermetic principles, few have been misunderstood more than the law of gender. Modern readers often assume it refers primarily to biological differences between men and women. Yet the ancient Hermetic texts speak of something much broader and more universal. The principle describes complementary forces present throughout existence. Creation, according to Hermetic wisdom, emerges through the interaction of two essential dynamics, active and receptive, initiating and nurturing, projecting and cultivating. These forces were symbolically described as masculine and feminine principles. The key word is symbolic. The Hermetic masters were not discussing social roles or physical characteristics. They were describing universal patterns found in nature, psychology, creativity, and consciousness itself. Consider a simple example. Every great work begins with an idea. The initial spark appears. A vision emerges. This resembles the active principle, yet an idea alone accomplishes nothing. It must be developed, nourished, refined, and brought into form. This reflects the receptive principle. Both are necessary. Without inspiration, nothing begins. Without cultivation, nothing grows. Creation requires union. Ancient teachers often illustrated this truth through stories. One Hermetic tale speaks of a sculptor who dreamed of creating a magnificent statue. He spent years imagining the masterpiece in exquisite detail, yet he never touched the stone. The vision remained trapped within his mind. Nearby lived another craftsman who worked tirelessly every day, but without purpose or direction. He struck stone endlessly, yet produced nothing meaningful. One possessed inspiration without execution, the other possessed effort without vision. Neither succeeded. Only when vision and action united did the masterpiece emerge. The Hermetic sages saw this pattern everywhere. The seed and the soil, the architect and the builder, the thought and the expression, the dream and the discipline. Every act of creation depends upon balance between complementary forces. This principle also operates within the human psyche. Most people naturally favor certain qualities while neglecting others. Some excel at action but struggle with reflection. Others possess deep insight but hesitate to act. Some cultivate strength while neglecting compassion. Others develop sensitivity while avoiding courage. The result is imbalance. Ancient wisdom emphasized integration. The complete individual develops both dimensions. Marcus Aurelius embodied disciplined action while maintaining thoughtful introspection. Many great philosophers combined logic with imagination. Many wise leaders balanced authority with empathy. Their effectiveness emerged not from one-sided development, but from inner harmony. A beautiful parable from the Hermetic tradition tells of two birds living within the same tree. One bird spent all day flying, searching, exploring, and conquering new territory. The other remained still, observing, understanding, and reflecting. Each believed the other was weak. One day a storm arrived. The flying bird became exhausted. The resting bird lacked practical experience. Only by working together did they survive. The lesson is simple. Wholeness requires integration. Psychological growth often follows this pattern. A person who has spent years focused exclusively on achievement may eventually need stillness. Someone trapped in endless contemplation may need decisive action. Someone dominated by logic may need imagination. Someone overwhelmed by emotion may need structure. The law of gender teaches that genuine development occurs when opposing capacities cooperate rather than compete. This idea appears across countless wisdom traditions. Eastern philosophy speaks of complementary forces within existence. Alchemy described the sacred union of opposites. Mystical traditions frequently portrayed enlightenment as a reconciliation of divided aspects of the self. The symbolism changes, the message remains remarkably consistent. Balance creates power. Modern life often encourages extremes. People are pressured to choose sides, be productive or reflective, strong or compassionate, practical or imaginative. Ancient wisdom rejects this false choice. The Hermetic masters understood that the most effective individuals cultivate multiple dimensions of themselves. A wise leader possesses both firmness and understanding. A great creator combines vision and discipline. A mature individual balances courage with humility. Creation occurs when complementary forces work together. This teaching becomes especially valuable during periods of inner conflict. Sometimes people feel divided within themselves. One part wants security, another seeks adventure, one desires change. Another craves stability. Rather than treating these tensions as problems, Hermetic wisdom encourages dialogue. Opposing impulses often contain valuable information. Integration produces insight. The practical application of this principle is straightforward. Cultivate balance. Notice which qualities dominate your personality. Then consciously strengthen their counterparts. If you tend toward action, practice reflection. If you tend toward reflection, practice action. If you emphasize logic, nurture imagination. If you rely heavily on feeling, develop structure. Growth occurs through expansion. Wholeness emerges through integration. The ancients understood something many people overlook. Life does not flourish through division. It flourishes through harmony. The tree requires roots and branches. The river requires movement and containment. The individual requires both strength and wisdom, both vision and discipline, both courage and understanding. Because the greatest creations arise when complementary forces unite. Chapter 9. Hermetic Alchemy and Inner Transformation. For centuries, people believed alchemists were obsessed with a single impossible dream, turning lead into gold. Kings funded them, scholars mocked them, legends grew around secret laboratories hidden beneath castles and temples. Yet many of the greatest Hermetic teachers hinted that the true secret of alchemy was never about metal at all. The lead was human consciousness, the gold was awakened wisdom. This is where one of the deepest misunderstandings of ancient knowledge begins. When modern readers encounter alchemical symbols, they often assume they describe physical experiments. Certainly, some alchemists worked with minerals, metals, and chemical processes, but behind these external operations existed a second language, a symbolic language describing inner transformation. The Hermetic sages understood something that remains true today. The hardest substance to transform is not metal, it is the human ego. Changing iron into gold would be impressive. Transforming fear into courage is far rarer. Turning resentment into understanding is far more valuable. Converting suffering into wisdom is the greatest miracle of all. The ancient alchemists used vivid imagery to describe this process. They spoke of furnaces, purification, fire, dissolution, and rebirth. To the uninitiated, these appeared to be descriptions of chemistry. To the student of inner wisdom, they described the journey of the soul. A person enters life carrying many forms of psychological lead, old wounds, limiting beliefs, unexamined fears. Resentments accumulated over years, identities inherited from family, society, and circumstance. These burdens weigh heavily upon consciousness. Like lead, they are dense. Like lead, they restrict movement. Like lead, they obscure brilliance. The purpose of inner alchemy is not to deny these burdens, but to transform them. There is an old Hermetic tale about a young apprentice who traveled to study under a legendary alchemist. Expecting to learn secret formulas for wealth, he spent months observing the master's work. Day after day, the old teacher placed ordinary stones into a furnace. Day after day, nothing remarkable happened. Finally, frustrated, the apprentice demanded an explanation. "When will you teach me how to create gold?" The master smiled. "I already have." The apprentice looked around in confusion. "There is no gold here." The old man pointed toward the student's heart. "Yet when you arrived, you were impatient, arrogant, and restless. Now you are patient, disciplined, and attentive. Which transformation matters more?" The apprentice finally understood. The laboratory had never been the room. The laboratory was himself. This insight appears repeatedly throughout Hermetic literature. True transformation occurs when experience is consciously refined rather than unconsciously endured. Consider how most people relate to suffering. When hardship arrives, they often ask, "Why is this happening to me?" The Hermetic alchemist asks a different question. "What is this trying to teach me?" One question creates victimhood. The other creates transformation. The event may remain the same. The consciousness experiencing it changes completely. This shift is the beginning of inner alchemy. History offers countless examples. A failure becomes humility, a loss becomes compassion, a betrayal becomes discernment, a period of isolation becomes self-knowledge. The external experience remains painful, yet something valuable emerges from it. The lead becomes gold. Ancient Hermetic teachers often compared this process to fire. Fire destroys, but it also purifies. Gold placed within a furnace loses impurities. Likewise, life's challenges often reveal what is false within us. Pride is exposed, fear becomes visible, attachment reveals itself. Illusions collapse. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels devastating. Yet without this exposure, transformation cannot occur. Nothing refined avoids the fire. A powerful example comes from the life of many great philosophers and mystics. Before their wisdom influenced others, they often passed through profound periods of difficulty. Exile, failure, rejection, uncertainty, and loss frequently preceded insight. The world remembers the gold, it forgets the furnace. Hermetic wisdom teaches that growth follows a similar pattern for everyone. Challenges are not always punishments. Often they are invitations to become stronger, to become wiser, invitations to discover capacities that comfort never reveals. This does not mean seeking suffering unnecessarily. The Hermetic masters never glorified pain for its own sake. Instead, they taught that suffering becomes meaningful when transformed into understanding. Untransformed suffering creates bitterness. Transformed suffering creates wisdom. The difference changes everything. The psychological relevance of this teaching is profound. Every person possesses experiences they wish had never happened. Disappointments, mistakes, falsures, moments of regret. Yet these experiences frequently contain hidden lessons. When examined honestly, they reveal strengths that otherwise might never have developed. Patience emerges through difficulty. Compassion emerges through pain. Resilience emerges through adversity. Wisdom emerges through reflection. The ancient alchemists would have called this the great work, not the accumulation of wealth, not the acquisition of power. The refinement of consciousness, the transformation of the self, the practical application of this principle begins with a simple practice. The next time hardship appears, resist the urge to ask only, "How do I escape this?" Instead ask, "What quality is this experience inviting me to develop?" Patience, courage, understanding, discipline, humility, awareness. This question transforms the entire experience. The event remains difficult, yet it becomes meaningful, and meaning changes suffering. The Hermetic masters believed every challenge contains concealed gold waiting to be discovered. Not every experience feels valuable immediately. Some lessons take years to reveal themselves. Some wounds require time to understand. But transformation begins the moment awareness enters the process. The furnace becomes a teacher. The obstacle becomes material for growth. The lead begins its journey toward gold. Because true alchemy was never about changing metal. It was always about changing ourselves. True alchemy is internal. Chapter 10, The Emerald Tablet. Among all Hermetic writings, no document has inspired more fascination, speculation, and mystery than the Emerald Tablet. For centuries, seekers whispered about it, philosophers debated its meaning, alchemists treated it as sacred, mystics regarded it as a key to hidden knowledge. Though remarkably brief, the Emerald Tablet became one of the most influential texts in the history of esoteric thought. Its reputation was extraordinary. Legends claimed it had been inscribed by Hermes Trismegistus himself upon a tablet of emerald stone. Some stories suggested it was discovered hidden within ancient tombs. Others claimed it contained the fundamental laws governing existence. Whether these stories are historically accurate matters less than the impact the text produced. Its influence endured because it spoke through symbols rather than direct explanation. And symbols possess a unique power. They communicate simultaneously to intellect, imagination, and intuition. The most famous phrase associated with the Emerald Tablet remains, "As above, so below, as below, so above." Simple words, endless implications. The statement suggests a profound correspondence between different levels of reality. Patterns visible in one domain often appear in another. The small reflects the large, the inner reflects the outer. The individual mirrors universal principles. Ancient Hermetic students spent years contemplating this idea, not because it offered answers, because it opened questions. They observed the heavens and noticed cycles. They observed nature and noticed similar rhythms. They examined human psychology and found repeating structures. Everywhere they looked, patterns echoed one another. The Emerald Tablet encouraged them to study these correspondences, not to memorize doctrines, to cultivate perception. There is an ancient story about a traveler who visited a Hermetic school seeking secret wisdom. Expecting elaborate teachings, he asked the master to reveal the hidden formula of transformation. Instead of answering, the master handed him a seed. Confused, the traveler protested. "I came for wisdom, not gardening," the master replied. "Study the seed." Reluctantly, the traveler planted it. Months later, he returned. It became a tree. The master nodded. "And what became the tree? A seed. And what becomes a life?" The traveler fell silent. The lesson was clear. Nature reveals principles repeatedly: growth, cycles, transformation, correspondence. Those who learn to observe deeply discover wisdom everywhere. The Emerald Tablet trains this kind of perception. Its symbolic language forces the reader beyond literal interpretation. This is one reason ancient teachers favored symbols over straightforward explanations. Literal statements inform, symbols transform. A literal statement tells you something. A symbol invites participation. Consider a dream. Dreams rarely communicate through direct language. Instead, they speak through images, metaphors, and narratives. The unconscious mind often expresses itself symbolically because symbols carry multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. Hermetic texts operate similarly. The Emerald Tablet functions almost like a philosophical dream. Each phrase contains more meaning than can be captured by a single interpretation. This frustrated some readers. Others found it liberating. The goal was never to hand seekers ready-made conclusions. The goal was to awaken insight. A symbol remains alive because it continues revealing new meanings. A doctrine often becomes rigid. A symbol evolves with understanding. This explains why Hermetic teachings survived across centuries despite changing cultures and languages. The symbols remained relevant because human consciousness remained relevant. The mysteries described by the tablet are ultimately human mysteries. Identity, purpose, transformation, awareness, creation. These questions never disappear. A fascinating aspect of the Emerald Tablet is its insistence that transformation follows universal laws. The text suggests that growth is not random. There is structure beneath apparent chaos, order beneath confusion, meaning beneath appearances. Ancient initiates believed that understanding these principles allowed a person to cooperate more consciously with life, not control everything, not manipulate reality, but align with deeper patterns. A sailor cannot control the ocean, yet understanding the winds allows navigation. The Hermetic masters viewed wisdom similarly. Knowledge of universal principles helps individuals move through life with greater awareness. The practical application remains remarkably relevant. Seek meaning beneath symbols. Notice recurring themes in your experiences. Pay attention to patterns that repeat across different areas of life. Observe how internal states influence external actions. Study correspondences rather than isolated events. Most importantly, resist the temptation to reduce everything to literal appearances. Reality often communicates indirectly. Life teaches through symbols. Relationships reveal hidden beliefs, challenges expose unseen fears, dreams express unconscious truths, sparks repeat until understood. The Emerald Tablet reminds us that wisdom requires more than information. It requires perception, the capacity to see beyond surfaces, the willingness to explore deeper meanings, the courage to question appearances. Because the greatest truths are rarely shouted. They are concealed within symbols, waiting for attentive minds to discover them. And those symbols continue speaking across centuries to anyone willing to listen. Chapter 11. Hermeticism and the Renaissance. There are moments in history when forgotten ideas return with such force that they alter the course of civilization. The Renaissance was one of those moments. It is often remembered as an age of art, science, architecture, and exploration. Yet beneath the visible achievements of the era flowed a quieter current, a rediscovery of ancient wisdom that many believed had been lost for centuries. Among the texts that captivated scholars, philosophers, and seekers were the writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. To understand the excitement these texts generated, imagine living in a world where fragments of a forgotten library suddenly emerged from the shadows. Generations had passed, empires had risen and fallen, languages had changed. Yet hidden beneath layers of history waited ideas that seemed to speak directly to the deepest questions of existence. Who are we? What is consciousness? What is the relationship between humanity and the cosmos? Can wisdom transform the soul? For Renaissance thinkers, Hermetic writings appeared to offer answers. The story begins in 15th century Italy when ancient Greek manuscripts began flowing westward from the collapsing Byzantine world. Scholars eagerly translated forgotten works, hoping to recover the wisdom of antiquity. Among these manuscripts was the Corpus Hermeticum. The effect was immediate. Many readers believed they had discovered the teachings of an immensely ancient sage who possessed knowledge from the dawn of civilization itself. Today, historians know the texts were written much later than Renaissance scholars assumed, yet their impact remained profound. Sometimes an idea changes history, not because people understand it perfectly, but because it awakens a forgotten hunger. And that hunger was for meaning. Europe was changing rapidly. Old structures were being questioned. New discoveries challenged inherited assumptions. People sought ways to reconcile reason, spirituality, nature, and human potential. Hermetic philosophy offered a bridge. It suggested that the universe was orderly rather than chaotic. It proposed that humanity was not separate from creation, but deeply connected to it. It encouraged the pursuit of knowledge while also emphasizing self-transformation. For many thinkers, this was revolutionary. A famous story tells of a young scholar who spent years memorizing facts, mastering languages, and studying theology. Yet despite his learning, he felt strangely empty. One evening he encountered an elderly philosopher reading a Hermetic manuscript. "What wisdom have you found there?" the young scholar asked. The old man smiled. "It teaches that knowledge is not merely something you possess." "What is it then?" "It is something that transforms you." The young scholar spent the next several years studying differently. Instead of asking only what was true, he began asking how truth should change the way he lived. His learning deepened, so did his character. This distinction lies at the heart of Hermetic wisdom. Information accumulates, wisdom transforms. The Renaissance became powerful partly because it encouraged both intellectual discovery and personal inquiry. Artists studied mathematics and symbolism. Philosophers explored both reason and spirituality. Scientists investigated nature while contemplating deeper principles. Many of the greatest minds of the era refused to see knowledge as divided into separate compartments. They sought unity. This aspiration echoes a central Hermetic idea, that reality is interconnected. A person studying the stars might learn something about the mind. A person studying nature might learn something about the soul. A person studying themselves might learn something about the universe. The boundaries between disciplines became more porous. Curiosity expanded. Possibilities multiplied. This spirit of inquiry remains relevant today. Modern life often rewards specialization. People become experts in increasingly narrow fields. There is enormous value in expertise, yet something can be lost when curiosity becomes confined. The Hermetic tradition encourages a broader perspective. Look for connections, study widely, remain open. A scientist may learn from philosophy, a philosopher may learn from psychology, a business leader may learn from ancient history. A spiritual seeker may learn from observing nature. Wisdom frequently appears where different streams of knowledge meet. The Renaissance reminds us that intellectual awakening begins with questions, not answers. Questions, the greatest discoveries, often emerge from individuals willing to wonder. A child asks why the stars move. A philosopher asks what consciousness is. A scientist asks how nature functions. A seeker asks who they truly are. Every meaningful journey begins with curiosity. The Hermetic texts inspired this kind of exploration because they refused to provide simplistic conclusions. They invited contemplation. A symbol demanded interpretation. A paradox demanded reflection. A mystery demanded participation. Readers became investigators rather than passive recipients. In many ways, the Renaissance itself resembled an initiation. Civilization rediscovered forgotten knowledge. Old assumptions were challenged. New possibilities emerged. The process was not always comfortable. Awakenings rarely are, yet growth followed, innovation followed, transformation followed. The lesson extends far beyond history. Each human life experiences its own renaissance. There are moments when forgotten insights return, moments when old perspectives collapse, moments when curiosity awakens once again. A retired teacher discovers a passion for art. A businessman begins studying philosophy. A grandmother starts exploring meditation. A young professional rediscovers wonder after years of routine. The awakening of curiosity often marks the beginning of inner renewal. The Hermetic sages would have recognized this immediately. For them, wisdom was never a destination. It was a lifelong pursuit. The student remained a student. The seeker remained a seeker, because reality always contains deeper layers. The practical application is simple. Remain intellectually curious. Ride beyond your usual interests. Question assumptions. Explore unfamiliar perspectives. Study ideas that challenge you. Approach life with the humility of someone who knows there is always more to learn. Curiosity keeps consciousness alive. The moment we believe we know everything, growth stops. The moment we begin asking questions again, transformation resumes. The Renaissance stands as proof that forgotten wisdom can return after centuries. The same is true within the individual. Insights forgotten for decades can suddenly reappear. Wonder can return. Meaning can return. Purpose can return, because genuine wisdom does not disappear, it waits. And when the mind becomes ready, it speaks again. Chapter 12. Why Hermetic Wisdom Was Hidden. One of the most fascinating questions surrounding Hermeticism is not what it taught, But why so much of it was concealed? Why were teachings hidden behind symbols? Why were students required to undergo initiation? Why did mystery schools reveal knowledge gradually rather than openly? To modern minds, secrecy often appears suspicious. Yet for many ancient traditions, concealment served a very different purpose. The goal was not exclusion, the goal was preparation. Ancient teachers understood a truth that remains relevant today. Knowledge can be beneficial or destructive depending upon the character of the person receiving it. A sharp sword in skilled hands protects. The same sword in reckless hands harms. Power magnifies intention. Wisdom therefore required responsibility. The mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and later Hermetic traditions believed that certain teachings should be approached gradually because transformation must accompany understanding. Without transformation, knowledge easily becomes ego. Without maturity, insight becomes manipulation. Without discipline, power becomes danger. There is an ancient story about a young seeker who approached a renowned teacher asking for the deepest secrets of the mysteries. The teacher listened patiently. Then he handed the student a bowl filled to the brim with water. "Carry this through the village without spilling a drop." The student laughed. "Is this a test?" "It is." The task seemed simple. Yet as the young man walked through crowded streets, distractions appeared everywhere. Children ran past him. Merchants called for attention. Friends tried to start conversations. By the time he returned, half the water was gone. The teacher asked a single question. "What did you learn?" The student lowered his head. "I learned that my attention is weaker than I imagined." The teacher nodded. "And now you understand why deeper teachings require preparation." The lesson was profound. The first initiation was not into secret knowledge, it was into self-knowledge. Many people seek extraordinary wisdom while lacking mastery over ordinary habits. They desire power before discipline, influence before responsibility, knowledge before character. Ancient mystery schools reversed this order. Character came first. The Hermetic tradition repeatedly emphasized inner development. Students were expected to cultivate patience, integrity, self-control, and discernment, not because these qualities were morally fashionable, but because they provided stability. Imagine giving advanced navigation tools to someone who cannot steer a ship. The tools themselves are not dangerous. The lack of readiness is. Hermetic teachers understood this principle deeply. This explains why so much wisdom was communicated through symbols. Symbols naturally filter understanding. An unprepared person sees only a story. A prepared person perceives multiple layers. The same text reveals different meanings depending upon the reader. In this way, wisdom protected itself not through locked doors, through depth. A child reading a myth sees adventure, an adult sees psychology, a sage sees spiritual truth. The story remains unchanged, the observer evolves. This approach appears throughout ancient traditions. Parables, allegories, sacred symbols, initiatory rituals, all functioned as educational tools designed to stimulate growth rather than merely transmit information. The emphasis was always on becoming, not merely knowing. A revealing example appears throughout history. Some individuals acquire tremendous information, yet remain emotionally immature. Their knowledge becomes a source of pride rather than wisdom. Others possess less information but greater understanding. Their humility, patience, and compassion allow them to use knowledge wisely. The Hermetic masters cared far more about the second person because wisdom without character is incomplete. The modern world offers a striking parallel. Information has never been more accessible. A person can access thousands of books, lectures, and teachings instantly, yet information abundance does not automatically produce wisdom. In many cases, it creates confusion. People collect ideas without integration. They accumulate concepts without transformation. They know more yet understand less. The ancients anticipated this problem. That is why initiation focused on application. Knowledge had to become lived experience. A teaching was considered understood only when it altered behavior, not when it could be recited, not when it could be debated, when it could be lived. This remains one of Hermeticism's greatest lessons. The true measure of wisdom is not what you know, it is what you embody. Can knowledge make you calmer, more compassionate, more disciplined, more aware, more responsible? If not, the teaching remains incomplete. The mystery schools sought readiness because readiness determines impact. A mature individual can receive powerful insights without becoming arrogant. A prepared individual can gain influence without becoming corrupt. A disciplined individual can wield knowledge without becoming reckless. Character creates capacity. This is why the Hermetic tradition placed such emphasis on inner refinement. Preparation was not a barrier. It was protection, protection for the student, protection for the teaching, protection for the future. The practical lesson is timeless. Cultivate readiness. Develop patience before seeking power. Develop discipline before seeking influence. Develop character before seeking mastery. The deeper truths of life reveal themselves naturally when the individual becomes capable of carrying them. Wisdom is not withheld, it is unfolded, gradually, carefully, responsibly. The ancients understood that some doors open through effort, while others open through maturity, and often the greatest mysteries are not hidden from us. They are waiting for us to become ready enough to understand them. Chapter 13. The Hermetic Path of Self-Knowledge. There is a question so ancient, so simple, and yet so profound that entire civilizations have built philosophies around it. Who are you? Not your name, not your profession, not your accomplishments, not the story you tell others. Who are you beneath all of that? The Hermetic tradition regarded this question as the gateway to every higher mystery. Before one could understand the stars, the laws of nature, or the hidden architecture of reality, one had to understand oneself. For Hermes Trismegistus, self-knowledge was not merely useful wisdom. It was sacred knowledge. The Corpus Hermeticum repeatedly points seekers inward. Again and again, the student is reminded that the deepest mysteries are not hidden in distant temples or secret libraries. They are concealed within human consciousness itself. This idea appears simple until one attempts it. Most people spend their lives studying everything except themselves. They learn how markets work, how governments work, how machines work, how other people think, yet they rarely investigate the assumptions, fears, desires, and identities operating within their own minds. The ancients saw this as humanity's greatest paradox. The seeker searches everywhere, except the place where the treasure rests. There is an old Hermetic parable about a traveler who spent decades searching for a legendary temple said to contain the wisdom of the gods. He crossed deserts, sailed oceans, climbed mountains, and studied under countless teachers. Finally, exhausted and old, he reached a remote sanctuary hidden among cliffs. Inside sat a silent sage. The traveler fell to his knees. "I have come for the final teaching." The sage pointed toward a polished bronze mirror hanging on the wall. The traveler stared at his own reflection. Confused, he asked, "What does this mean?" The sage replied, "You traveled around the world to arrive where you began. The story survives because it reveals something deeply human. We often imagine fulfillment exists somewhere else, a different city, a different relationship, a different career, a different circumstance. Yet many of life's deepest discoveries emerge not through movement outward, but through movement inward. The Hermetic masters taught that self-observation is the first step toward awakening. Observe your thoughts, observe your reactions, observe your fears, observe your habits. Observe the stories you repeat about yourself. This may sound simple, but it requires courage, because genuine self-observation often reveals uncomfortable truths. Perhaps the anger we blame on others originates within us. Perhaps the insecurity we hide drives more decisions than we realize. Perhaps the limitations we attribute to circumstance are partly sustained by belief. Awareness illuminates what habit conceals, and illumination is the beginning of freedom. A man once visited a Hermetic teacher complaining that his life never changed. Every year seemed identical. Every disappointment repeated itself. Every relationship followed the same pattern. The teacher listened quietly. Then he handed the man a lantern. "Walk through your house tonight." The man returned, confused. "I already know my house. Do you?" asked the teacher. That night the man walked slowly through rooms he had occupied for years. For the first time he noticed cracks in the walls, dust hidden in corners, broken objects left unrepaired. The next day he understood. The teacher had not been speaking about the house. He had been speaking about the mind. Many people live inside themselves without truly seeing themselves. The Hermetic path begins with turning on the lantern. Self-knowledge is not self-criticism. It is self-discovery. The goal is not condemnation but understanding. This distinction matters enormously. Some people avoid introspection because they fear what they might find. Others become trapped in endless self-analysis without compassion. Hermetic wisdom encourages a different approach. Observe honestly. Observe patiently. Observe without judgment. The observer and the observed gradually become clearer. One of the greatest obstacles to self-knowledge is identification with social roles. A person may spend decades believing they are their profession: a lawyer, a teacher, a parent, a business owner, a soldier. These roles have value. They shape experience and responsibility. Yet the Hermetic sages warned against mistaking a role for an identity. Change. Circumstances shift. What remains? This question lies at the heart of Hermetic inquiry. Imagine an actor who performs the same role for 20 years. Eventually the character becomes familiar, comfortable, predictable. But if the actor forgets he is acting, confusion begins. The role becomes a prison. Something similar happens psychologically. People become attached to identities formed by childhood experiences, social expectations, or cultural conditioning. I am the successful one. I am the victim. I am the responsible one. I am the outsider. These narratives become invisible cages. The Hermetic path invites us to look beyond them. Who are you when no role is being performed? Who are you beneath success and failure? Who are you beneath praise and criticism? Who are you beneath history itself? These questions are not merely philosophical, they are transformative. Because identity determines perception, and perception shapes experience. The more deeply one investigates the self, the more flexible identity becomes. And the more flexible identity becomes, the greater freedom emerges. The ancients understood that many human struggles arise from confusion about identity. A person who believes they are their achievements suffers when achievements disappear. A person who believes they are their possessions suffers when possessions are lost. A person who believes they are social approval suffers when approval fades. But a person rooted in deeper self-knowledge possesses a different kind of stability. Their center remains intact. Circumstances change. The self remains. This is why Hermetic texts repeatedly connect self-knowledge with liberation, not because self-knowledge magically removes difficulties, but because it changes the relationship to them. Storms still arrive. Yet the observer becomes less identified with the storm. Thoughts still arise. Yet awareness remains larger than thought. Emotions still move. Yet consciousness remains larger than emotion. The seeker gradually discovers a profound truth. You have experiences, but you are not the experiences themselves. You witness thoughts, but you are not the thoughts. You observe emotions, but you are not the emotions. There is something deeper, something constant, something observing. The Hermetic path ultimately leads toward recognition of that deeper center. The practical application begins today. Question who you really are. Notice identities you automatically assume. Observe stories you continually repeat. Ask whether they are absolute truths or inherited assumptions. Become curious about yourself. The greatest mysteries often hide in familiar places, and the most overlooked territory is often the inner world. The sages understood this long ago. The journey inward is the journey home. Chapter 14. Hermeticism and the Modern Mind. At first glance, Hermeticism appears distant from modern life. Ancient manuscripts, mystery schools, symbolic language. Teachings attributed to a legendary sage who may never have existed in the way later generations imagined. Yet the deeper one studies Hermetic wisdom, the more surprising its relevance becomes. Because while technology changes, human consciousness remains remarkably similar. The fears that troubled ancient seekers still trouble modern people. The distractions have changed, the mind has not. A Roman merchant worried about reputation. A modern executive worries about reputation. An Egyptian priest struggled with uncertainty. A modern entrepreneur struggles with uncertainty. A philosopher in Alexandria wrestled with identity. A person scrolling through social media wrestles with identity. Different centuries, same questions. This is why Hermetic ideas continue to resonate. They address fundamental aspects of human experience: attention, perception, meaning, conscientiousness, self-knowledge, the relationship between inner and outer reality. Modern psychology increasingly explores themes that ancient Hermetic thinkers contemplated centuries ago. Today, researchers study cognitive biases, the hidden assumptions shaping perception. Hermetic teachers spoke about the filters through which reality is interpreted. Psychologists investigate self-concept and identity. Hermetic sages examined the stories individuals tell themselves. Neuroscience explores attention and awareness. Hermetic traditions emphasized conscious observation as a path toward transformation. The language differs. The underlying questions often overlap. One of the most practical Hermetic insights concerns attention. The modern world competes aggressively for it. Advertisements seek it. Applications seek it. Notifications seek it. Algorithms seek it. Attention has become one of the most valuable resources on Earth. The ancients would not have been surprised. They understood that attention directs consciousness, and consciousness shapes experience. Consider a simple example. Two people walk through the same city. One notices beauty, the other notices problems. One notices opportunities, the other notices obstacles. The city remains unchanged. Perception differs, the experience differs. Hermetic wisdom teaches that awareness influences reality, not because the physical world magically rearranges itself, but because perception determines what becomes meaningful. What you consistently notice expands psychologically. What you consistently ignore fades psychologically. Attention acts like sunlight. Whatever receives it grows. This principle becomes even more relevant in an age of constant distraction. Many people spend entire days reacting to messages, reacting to headlines, reacting to opinions, reacting to circumstances. Yet Hermetic philosophy encourages conscious participation rather than unconscious reaction. Pause, observe, choose deliberately. This simple practice can transform daily life. A modern parable illustrates the point. A businessman complained that every day felt chaotic. His schedule was packed, his mind was exhausted, his attention fragmented. A mentor gave him unusual advice. For 1 week, spend 5 minutes each morning observing your thoughts before touching your phone. The businessman laughed. Such a small exercise seemed insignificant. Yet after several weeks he noticed something remarkable. He became less reactive, more intentional, more aware of emotional patterns. Nothing external had changed. Awareness had changed. And awareness altered experience. The Hermetic masters would recognize this immediately. Transformation often begins with attention. Not force, not struggle, attention. Another reason Hermetic wisdom remains relevant is its emphasis on integration. Modern life often divides existence into separate compartments: work, family, health, spirituality, personal growth. Hermetic philosophy seeks connections between them. It encourages seeing life as a unified whole. A conflict at work may reveal an internal pattern. A recurring relationship challenge may reveal a hidden belief. An external obstacle may become an opportunity for self-understanding. Life itself becomes a teacher. This perspective transforms ordinary experiences into sources of wisdom. Nothing becomes meaningless. Everything becomes potentially instructive. The Hermetic seeker does not ask merely, "What happened?" They ask, "What is this experience teaching me?" That question changes everything, because meaning changes perception, and perception changes response. Ultimately, the enduring power of Hermeticism lies not in its age, but in its timelessness. Its symbols remain alive because the realities they describe remain alive. Its teachings remain relevant because human consciousness remains the field in which all experience occurs. The world has changed dramatically since the days of Alexandria, yet awareness still matters, self-knowledge still matters, attention still matters, meaning still matters, and the search for wisdom still matters. The Hermetic tradition reminds us that ancient knowledge is not truly ancient when it continues to illuminate the present. The teachings survive because the questions survive. Who am I? What is reality? How should I live? What is consciousness? Every generation asks them anew, and every generation must discover its own answers. The practical lesson is beautifully simple. Practice conscious awareness. Pay attention to your thoughts. Observe your assumptions. Notice where your attention flows. Become present to your own experience. The ancient teachings are not relics. They are invitations to wake up. Invitations to observe, invitations to remember. Because wisdom does not belong to the past, it becomes alive whenever it is practiced. Chapter 15. The Great Hermetic Secret. There is a secret hidden beneath every Hermetic text, every symbol etched into ancient stone, every mystery whispered within forgotten temples. Most seekers miss it. They spend years collecting information, memorizing principles, studying symbols, and debating interpretations. They fill notebooks with knowledge and shelves with books. Yet, despite accumulating vast amounts of information, their lives remain unchanged. The Hermetic masters warned of this danger long ago. Knowledge alone does not transform, information alone does not awaken. The greatest secret of Hermeticism is that its teachings were never intended to become possessions of the mind. They were intended to become conditions of being. The ancient initiates understood something modern culture often forgets. A person can know thousands of truths and still remain asleep. A man may read every book about courage and still live in fear. He may study wisdom and remain foolish. He may discuss love while withholding kindness. He may speak of spiritual awakening while remaining imprisoned by unconscious habits. The Hermetic path was never about accumulating ideas. It was about becoming different. An old story tells of a student who spent 20 years studying under a renowned Hermetic teacher. He mastered sacred geometry. He memorized the emerald tablet. He could recite passages from the Corpus Hermeticum flawlessly. Eventually, he approached his teacher and declared proudly, "Master, I now know all the teachings." The old teacher smiled. "Then why are you still the same man who arrived 20 years ago?" The student was silent. The question pierced deeper than any lesson. Because the teacher understood the difference between knowledge and transformation. One can carry water without ever drinking it. One can speak wisdom without embodying it. One can understand principles intellectually while remaining untouched by them emotionally. The Hermetic sages sought something greater. They sought spiritual rebirth, not rebirth as a supernatural event, not rebirth as an escape from life, but rebirth as the gradual transformation of perception itself. The person begins seeing differently, feeling differently, responding differently, living differently. The world may appear unchanged, yet everything changes because consciousness changes. The Corpus Hermeticum repeatedly describes awakening as a form of inner birth. The seeker dies to old ignorance and awakens to a larger awareness. This process rarely happens dramatically. More often it unfolds quietly. A reaction that once controlled you loses its power. A fear that once dominated your decisions begins to fade. A resentment carried for years finally dissolves. An old identity falls away. These moments may appear small, yet they are signs of genuine transformation. The ancient alchemists described turning lead into gold. The Hermetic initiate understood that the lead was human unconsciousness. The gold was awakened consciousness. And the furnace was everyday life itself. Life provides endless opportunities for refinement. Every challenge becomes an initiation. Every disappointment becomes a lesson. Every success becomes a test. Every relationship becomes a mirror. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is accidental. Everything participates in the work of transformation. This is why Hermetic wisdom emphasizes conscious participation in existence. Most people drift through life unconsciously. They react automatically, repeat familiar patterns, think familiar thoughts, experience familiar outcomes. The Hermetic seeker chooses another path. Instead of asking, "What happened to me?" they begin asking, "What is life attempting to teach me?" This question changes everything, because it transforms existence from a series of random events into a living classroom. The seeker becomes an active participant rather than a passive observer. Gradually, a remarkable realization emerges. The teaching is no longer confined to books. Life itself becomes the teaching. The marketplace teaches patience, relationships teach compassion, failure teaches humility, success teaches responsibility, Silence teaches awareness. Even suffering becomes a teacher. The wisdom once sought externally begins appearing everywhere. The seeker becomes the student and the lesson simultaneously. This is the great Hermetic secret. The ultimate goal is not to know wisdom. It is to become wisdom, to embody it so completely that it naturally expresses itself through thought, speech, and action. Ancient masters understood that transformation radiates. A truly wise person influences others not primarily through words but through presence. Their calm affects a room, their integrity inspires trust, their awareness alters conversations. Their character becomes their teaching. The practical application is beautifully simple. Do not merely study the principles, live them, practice awareness instead of merely discussing awareness. Practice responsibility instead of merely admiring responsibility. Practice compassion instead of merely praising compassion. Loin every teaching to become behavior. Loin every insight to become action. Allow every truth to become character, because wisdom fulfills its purpose only when it becomes life. Chapter 16, Final Law. The living Hermetic universe, after centuries of study, debate, interpretation, and mystery, all Hermetic teachings eventually return to one profound realization. The universe is not merely observed, it is participated in. The Hermetic masters taught that reality responds continuously to consciousness, not in the simplistic sense often imagined by modern interpretations, but in a deeper and more demanding way. Consciousness influences perception. Perception influences action. Action influences circumstance. Circumstance influences destiny. The chain is subtle, yet powerful. Most people seek extraordinary revelations while overlooking ordinary practice. They search for hidden knowledge, accurate symbols, ancient formulas, lost manuscripts. Yet the Hermetic sages repeatedly pointed toward something less dramatic and far more transformative: daily awareness. The living universe reveals itself through observation, not occasional observation. Consistent observation, an old Hermetic proverb states, "The sun reveals itself each morning, yet only the attentive witness its teaching." The meaning is clear. Truth often appears repeatedly. Yet awareness determines whether it is recognized. Imagine two travelers crossing the same desert. One sees only heat and hardship. The other notices patterns in the stars, rhythms in the wind, and lessons hidden in the landscape. The desert remains unchanged. The observers differ. So does their experience. The Hermetic universe is alive with instruction, but only awareness can receive it. This is why responsibility occupies such a central place within Hermetic philosophy. Many people seek power without responsibility, knowledge without discipline, influence without character. The mystery schools rejected this entirely. The greater the understanding, the greater the responsibility. Awareness demands participation. Once a person recognizes a pattern, they become responsible for responding to it. Once a person sees their destructive habits, they become responsible for changing them. Once a person discovers deeper truths, they become responsible for living them. Knowledge creates obligation. This principle frightened many seekers because it removed excuses. The Hermetic masters knew that transformation begins when blame ends. As long as responsibility remains externalized, growth remains limited. But when responsibility is reclaimed, possibility expands. A person who accepts responsibility for their inner life gains access to genuine freedom, not freedom from circumstances. Freedom within circumstances. That distinction changes everything. The ancient teachers often compared consciousness to a garden. Thoughts are seeds. Attention is water. Habit is soil. Character is the harvest. Every day something is growing. Every day something is being cultivated. The question is whether the cultivation is conscious or unconscious. This leads us to a practical experiment, a living initiation, a 30-day hermetic observation practice. For 30 days, become a student of your own consciousness. Observe your recurring thoughts. Observe emotional reactions. Observe assumptions. Observe habits. Observe patterns that repeat throughout your days. Do not judge them. Do not resist them. Simply observe. Write them down if possible. Notice what consistently creates peace. Notice what consistently creates suffering. Notice what strengthens awareness. Notice what weakens it. Ancient initiates spent years practicing such observation. The purpose was not self-criticism. The purpose was self-understanding, and self-understanding becomes the foundation of transformation. Over time, hidden patterns become visible. Invisible motivations become clear. Automatic reactions become conscious choices. The observer grows stronger. Awareness deepens. Life begins revealing lessons previously overlooked. Eventually, the seeker understands the profound truth hidden within the hermetic path. The universe was never withholding its secrets. The seeker lacked the awareness necessary to perceive them. And this realization brings us to one final hermetic teaching. The universe reveals its secrets not to those who seek information, but to those who become transformed by seeking. Read that carefully. The transformation is the key, not the information, not the theory, not the symbol, not the book. Transformation, because wisdom is not measured by what you know, it is measured by what you become. The living hermetic universe continues speaking today exactly as it spoke centuries ago, through patterns, through experience, through reflection, through awareness, through light itself. The invitation remains open. Observe, reflect, participate consciously, practice daily, live deliberately, limed wisdom to move from the page into your character, limed knowledge to become transformation, limed understanding to become being. Then the teachings cease to be ancient ideas, they become a living reality. And that is where the true hermetic journey begins. Conclusion. The eternal return of hermetic understanding. In the end, Hermeticism was never meant to be a collection of ancient ideas locked inside forgotten manuscripts. It was never meant to survive as mythology, philosophy, or intellectual curiosity alone. It was always pointing towards something more immediate, more intimate, more unsettling in its simplicity. The recognition that reality is experienced through consciousness and consciousness can be transformed. Across the Corpus Hermeticum, the Emerald Tablet, the Asclepius, and the fragments preserved through time, one message repeats itself in different forms, like an echo moving through centuries. That message is not about secret knowledge reserved for a chosen few, but about forgotten awareness buried within everyone. The initiate was never becoming something new. They were remembering something ancient within themselves. This is why Hermetic teachings feel both familiar and distant at the same time. Familiar because they reflect something we intuitively sense but rarely articulate. Distant because modern life is structured to keep attention outside rather than within. We are trained to observe the world, not the observer, to analyze outcomes, not origins, to chase effects, not causes. Yet Hermetic wisdom reverses this direction entirely. It asks a radical question. What if the outer world is not separate from the inner state, but continuously shaped by it? This is not a poetic metaphor in Hermetic thought. It is a discipline of perception. The idea that as above, so below is not a mystical slogan. It is an invitation to see correspondence everywhere, in thought and behavior, emotion and experience, belief and outcome. Once this lens is activated, life stops appearing random. It begins to reveal structure, rhythm, and reflection. But understanding this intellectually is not enough. The Hermetic tradition always returns to practice, because insight without embodiment remains incomplete. This is why every section of this journey, mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, gender, and transformation, ultimately leads back to one principle: awareness applied in real life. Not isolated meditation in silence alone, but awareness inside conflict, routine, relationships, failure, and success. The laboratory of Hermeticism is not the temple, it is daily existence. And so the final teaching is not a secret formula, but a way of being. Observe yourself as life unfolds. Notice how thought becomes emotion, how emotion becomes action, how action becomes consequence, and how consequence reinforces identity. This cycle is the true Hermetic engine of experience. When awareness enters this cycle, something begins to shift. Reaction slows. Choice expands. Patterns become visible before they repeat. The individual stops being entirely shaped by unconscious forces and begins participating consciously in their own formation. This is the hidden meaning behind transformation, not escape from life, but deeper participation in it. Hermeticism does not ask you to withdraw from the world, but to see it clearly enough that illusion no longer governs perception. It is not about rejecting reality, but recognizing how reality is constructed through attention, interpretation, and inner state. And in that recognition, responsibility returns, not as burden, but as power. Because once perception becomes conscious, life is no longer something that simply happens. It becomes something that is shaped. The ancient initiates understood this well. That is why their teachings were never rushed. They knew that insight must mature into character, and character must stabilize before deeper understanding is revealed. Wisdom was not withheld to exclude people, but to ensure that understanding could be carried without distortion. In modern terms, Hermeticism is not asking you to believe something new. It is asking you to see what has always been present, to notice the patterns you live inside, to recognize the intelligence behind your own awareness, and to begin slowly and deliberately, participating in that intelligence rather than resisting it, because once this shift occurs, something irreversible begins. You no longer just study Hermeticism, you begin to live it, and at that point, the ancient teaching becomes immediate reality. You are not separate from the universe. You are how the universe becomes aware of itself.